Jamal Parks says, out of curiosity, do you see a pending economic collapse similar to 2008 due to how much personal debt most Americans have? Knowing what you know now, could you have predicted 2008 back then? Absolutely. 100%. I don't think the collapse is going to be as all right. So let me take 10 minutes to speak to this. I think that there will be a reset. I don't even look at 2008 was manufactured. That was a manufactured collapse of our economy. All right. I need y'all to understand that. When you study and you look at it and you see how it was put together, 2008 was put together all the way from 94. 94 was, let's just say the early 90s. The early 90s today, all right, so let me tell you the difference between today and then. All right. Then in the 80s, everybody was broke. In the 80s, everybody was broke, right? So what happened was you start seeing a lot of growth in the United States of America, but the difference is that we still had industries. It was a lot of things that was going on politically that caused for a lot of changes within our industry. So, for example, you're talking about high gas prices, no jobs, the crack epidemic. It was a lot of crime. It was a crime wave that was happening across the United States of America. The 70s and the 80s absolutely destroyed the United States. But we still had a lot of industries. We had trains. We had the auto industry. We had cable was booming. Media was rising. So what happened in the 90s was that because we started to evolve in a technological era and you started to see the internet come about, we started selling off other industries because we were more focused on the financing. And so we mortgaged our future so that we can benefit, so that people in the 90s, then the 80s and the 90s can truly benefit. So what we did was we start partnering globally because we start focusing more on the affordability crisis. All right, now you about to get me into my bag. The affordability crisis started in the late 80s, early 90s. All right. And the reason that the affordability crisis started was because we started focusing more on moving more products through financing. And instead of having a balance between manufacturing and financing, we started focusing on short money. The United States of America through the 90s and the 2000s was short money, meaning, or it was fast money, meaning that we cared more about, and that's when you start seeing arbitrage in so many industries. You've seen Enrons, you've seen the financing industry, the banking industry absolutely boomed. And then you also had manufacturers of war. The manufacturing of war wasn't so much about taking advantage of other countries as much as it was about distracting us from what was happening here inside of the United States of America. Bush would have been a one-term president. The second Bush would have been a one-term president, in my opinion, had we not had 9/11, right? So what happened in the early 90s was that we started to really have an affordability crisis, but to solve for it, we started allowing for people to finance, and this is the 80s and the 90s, do more financing than ever before. We started promoting lower interest rates, longer terms, affordability of cars, and we didn't innovate because we started to sell off the United States of America. That's when you started to see the rise of China. You started to see more rise in Vietnam. You started to see the rise of other countries that was able to produce products cheaper because we outsourced to them. We started sending all of our manufacturers, and not just the auto industry, we sent all of our manufacturers overseas so that companies can get higher profits, the margins. That's the only thing we cared about in the 90s, and the margins. And that's why I said previous generations sold us out, because they were more focused on trying to make sure that they increase margins, because we didn't have lower prices, even though we were manufacturing products cheaper, we were having record profits, but that's because they was trying to increase the margins, the profitability of the companies. They wasn't necessarily trying to save Americans money. So that's when the affordability crisis started, is because we started having more costs, but to solve for it and to keep people distracted, we manufactured war, and we pushed financing on people. So you would think that back then we were actually generating more revenue because, or people were doing better because jobs were being created that wasn't making anything. You're talking about mortgages, financing, technological, the dot-com boom and bust. All of that stuff started to take off in the 90s. All right. 2004, 2005, 2006, you start seeing signs of a collapse because the banks got greedy and people in general got greedy because they wanted to continue to own and finance anything, but we didn't have that balance. And the balance was that we still didn't make anything. So we were largely depending on monies financing in order to generate more revenue, which is why the banks became too big to fail. Clinton and the first Bush, the second Bush, all of them, they sold us out. They mortgaged our future. They did the North American Free Trade Agreement. They subsidized China. They built up China. Clinton and all of them, they the ones that built up China. They made China a superpower, right? So they shipped all of our jobs off. The Chinese then stole all of our technology. And then eventually we didn't have no industries to depend on. So when they said that the banks was too big to fail, it was because that was the largest industry, because everybody was laying off in order to cut costs. And then we start innovating more in order to save some of these companies. That's when you've seen the bailouts of the auto companies. That's when you've seen the bailouts of the mortgage industry. That's when you've seen the bailout of the banks. So 2008 was truly a reset, but it was a reset from the perspective of all of the stuff that we had manufactured, we had to pay for in 2008. So you had to see a crash. You had to see a reset of the prices. Homes was going for astronomical prices and all of that. Now, this is the difference between now and then. All right. Now we're resetting from continuing to try to save the economy and then inflate prices and inflate, what we have going on, because we have to what Trump is doing right now is he's telling all of these countries, telling all of these companies, and he's forcing them to say, listen, there's going to be a lull, but we have to build up what's here in America because we got to bring industries back. We got to bring manufacturing back. We got to do all of that. So now what we're doing is we're trying to reset the opposite way and say, bring industry back, kick out all of these people that's doing stuff that's not necessarily adding value, and let's make America first, and let's bring all of our own jobs. Let's do all of our own stuff, and let's get it back together. So basically what we're doing today is we're trying to kick people off the nipple while at the same time bring all of our manufacturing back and bring all of our jobs back, right? You gotta have a reset, not just of the prices, not just of the industry, but you gotta have a reset of how we do business altogether. So it's almost like the reverse. So when people say, well, is there going to be an economic collapse? It depends on what you call an economic collapse. Innovation is always going to move. Money is always going to move. But the reset is completely different than what you've seen in 2008. 2008, we had to pay for mortgaging off our manufacturing industry and beefing it up because everybody got greedy with the banks and with financing, because that was the biggest industries that we had. It had basically took over everything that we had made in the United States of America. Nowadays, the reset is almost man-made. It's like we got to go through some shit so that we can save this country for our children. That's what it is. You said a reset is already happening. Kind of, sort of. Not really. Not really. I don't think so. I don't think it's happening the way that you think it's happening. I think the reset is completely different today. I think the reset is completely different today. So in order to save America, we can't keep doing the stuff that we've done over the last 20 years. When you see people say stuff like, oh my God, look at it, it used to be different than it was. It has to be different. It has to be different because we basically did a Ponzi scheme. The United States of America did a Ponzi scheme. We mortgaged our future and our children's future, and we gave them jobs and we subsidized them and we ran up the national debt. And so you got to deal with that shit. We got to deal with it. Eventually you got to do. It's almost like taking out a student loan and not paying it, right? The United States of America took out a $200,000 student loan, and now we can't afford the interest. But we partied over the last 25 years, right? We partied over the last 25 years. We had a ball. But we had this mindset like because we didn't pay our debt, like they don't pay their student loan debt, because you was on an income-based, or you went into forbearance on your debt, that you had a better lifestyle. No, you just wasn't paying your motherfucking bills. You wasn't paying your bills. So even when people say, I see somebody mention your car mentioned Social Security. If you're depending on Social Security when you retire, when you retire, you really gambling. You're gambling. If you're depending on Social Security to save you when you retire, you're gambling. You're gambling with your future. That's just a tax to me now. That's something that's never coming back. All of my strategy when it comes to long-term retirement, and this is why it's so important for y'all to join the Bag Chasers and to get involved and to get familiar with this money game. All of my stuff is going to be physical assets, literally real estate. Because the one thing that I know for and stocks is because the one thing that I know for sure is ownership in companies that continue to evolve and grow based off of whatever the value of money is. Physical assets, stocks, and real estate, and even crypto is going to be the thing that determines who's going to survive and who's not going to survive. If you think that you're going to work your way to death, then you got another thing coming. Real talk. If you're not owning physical assets, guess what I know is always going to happen? People are always going to need a place to stay. People are always going to need a place to stay. Whatever you pay with, that's what we're going to take. So my investment is long term. I'm looking at this 10 to 15, 20 years from now. Physical assets is going to be the determining factor for whether or not people survive or not. Job, industry, none of that stuff is going to matter, bro. None of it is going to matter. I'm telling you. What's cheap now is going to be expensive in the future. What's cheap now? Places, bro, listen. There are pieces of land and property in Detroit that used to go for $10,000 that is now worth millions. $10,000 just 15 years ago, 16, 17 years ago, is worth millions. I see this is going to be a money conversation that we have in the day.